ever since this Hollywood Reporter article came out, I've been scratching my head at the damage control that the Rings of Power showrunners have been doing to try to convince the world that they were the right people for the job and to sort of stem the tide of blood that's sort of leaking from this sinking ship as fans around the world rally and say, Rings of Power is really, 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 really bad. And the writing is at the core of what's really bad. And when you start to dig into what actually went into the writing, a very clear picture is painted. These guys right here, it was all about the quick, fast, let's get it done as quickly as possible so that we can get out of the writer's room and into the showrunner status because we've been doing this for 10 years. We want out of the dark. We want to be more than script doctors. We want to be known as people who are helming a show. So it said here in this interview, it says they worked together on an apartment floor and concocted a one-sentence pitch to chronicle the first 5 minutes of Peter Jackson's The Fellowship of the Ring, the Galadriel narrated prologue that told the story of the Rings of Power during the course of 5 seasons. Sorry. They made their pitch. They got called back. When they got called back, they said you need to pitch the whole show. This is your shot. Pitch the entire thing to stay alive for the next round, all 5 seasons. They said it was such a big ask on such short notice. They briefly considered canceling, but they then embarked on a marathon brainstorming session. Note that it says session, not sessions. One session, an overnight brainstorming marathon session where they cracked what would become the show's major storylines. When that session of fevered creativity and inspiration ended, we had a moment of silence, McKay recalls. I looked at the board like, that's it. This is what the show wants to be. They then walked into their second Amazon meeting full of confidence and then did 7 more pitches over the course of a 6-month presidential campaign trying to sway various executives and stakeholders to the point where, out of desperation, when they met with the estate, they greeted Simon Tolkien in Elvish. So keep a couple things in mind here. An overnight marathon session to come up with 5 seasons. Now let's go over and look at how long it took Peter Jackson and his team. Their first treatment, the first actual treatment they had to go through, they had a synopsis and they had the actual Lord of the Rings books. They did a reread, and it says within 2 to 3 months they had written their treatment. Now, anybody who's ever gone into the background and story of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings realizes there's a convoluted story here. It started back in 1995. By 1997, there was this back and forth because of the rights with King Kong. He was going to make King Kong, and then he was going to make Lord of the Rings, and then he was going to make King Kong. King Kong got canceled. He's going to make Lord of the Rings. They put the script together, and then eventually got to the point where they realized that they had agreed upon 2 films with a total budget of $75 million. So keeping in mind that they took 2 to 3 months to write their initial treatment, right? Compared to the showrunners for Rings of Power, who did it all in a marathon session, right? Came up with everything that we needed for, 5 seasons. Now, I know some of you out there are going to say, hang on. There's a big difference between outlining something in a single marathon session and doing an actual script treatment. You're not wrong. Part of what I do with these rant videos is to poke fun at things, but I want to show you the fevered pace and the difference between trying to rush something through production and actually taking the time to put it all together. If you've gotten to this point, we're almost 4 minutes into the video, and you don't know who I am, and you're new, well, I'm Tim Anderson. Some people call me Renfill, the bearded dwarven princess. I've always been known as Renfill, that's my gamer tag, but the bearded princess thing became a deal when I started doing Rings of Power because someone said I looked like a more convincing dwarven princess than Disa with her beardless face, and I've just run with it. And if you like everything that you hear today, do me a solid. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get more like this as I continue to do these Rings of Power rant videos and discussion videos. I also do the Mondays in Middle-earth every Monday at 11 a.m. while we read through The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion as we continue to expand upon our knowledge of Middle-earth to properly dissect Rings of Power and covering Season 2 production and all the ways they're probably going to screw that one up too. Support. It's super simple. On premieres like this, do super chats and stickers while we're sitting here chatting live to each other. And of course, after the fact, you can always do a one off super thanks. But the better option is a membership here on YouTube. There's 3 different tiers. At the end of the video, we'll talk about other ways you can support as well. But in the meantime, let's get back to the video, get over the call of action. I got to make a living, everybody. So, single marathon writing session versus Peter Jackson and company, Jackson and Walsh in particular, having spent a couple of years by the time they even got to the point where they were working on the agreed upon 2 films. They then spent about 14 months, so over a year, to write these 2 scripts, which were 147 and 144 pages, respectively. The convoluted stuff happens here is then they found out that the films were going to cost double the money to make. There's a huge shakeup with Miramax. Weinstein brothers, being the assholes that they were, try to hold things and tell Jackson to get bent. Jackson runs around, beats New Line Cinema's leader, and Robert Shea saw this video and said, "Why aren't you doing 3 films instead?" They eventually sorted out the rights and everything else, and then Peter Jackson, Walsh, and Boyens had to go back and restructure their script again, which then was another notable long writing process. So over the course of writing their initial draft and then going through and doing the 2 script treatment and then the 3 script treatment, it was roughly around 2 years of just writing, getting all of the script and production down, roughly. Meanwhile, on the Rings of Power, we have these 2 guys who appear to be more focused on the campaign, trying to sway the various executives and stakeholders as opposed to actually writing. Now, they did eventually get to the point where they got to writing, and it did take some time, and they worked on the scripts. And there's a good article that I did, a good video that I covered a few days ago now, at the onering.net, which kind of lays out the timeline of where we're at. Let me see if I can find that real quick. The One Ring. It's this one right here. November 15th, we got that. Okay, July 18th, they're announced as showrunners. July of 2018. March of 2019. So by this point, we're probably starting to get July of 2019. We announce the writers and Tolkien artist John Howe, along with Tolkien scholar Tom Shippey. That's July of 2019. Dun, 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 dun. I'm scrolling down here to see when it says that they finished up the... Aha, hang on. Production resume. So hang on. When did they start production? Begins in New Zealand. Okay. Now, it's hard to tell because it doesn't actually confirm specific dates here. But here's the announcement of July in 2019 when they announced, says meet the team behind. So this is the team that had been writing. So if we assume that they started before that, if we assume that they started in July of 2018 when the announcement was made that they were the showrunners. Now, I can't assume that that's actually when they started production because they may have had their outline, but they didn't have their writer's room assembled. It would have taken time to get there. But let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say that it started in July of 2018. It was basically a year of writing to get to production. So we have a year, which is a decent amount of time compared to the 2 years that Peter Jackson had with Fran and Boyens. And so the question I have to ask, though, is like when you start looking at, Peter Jackson had twice the time and a fraction of the budget and managed to create a masterpiece. Most people would agree. I know some people like to nitpick and say that they don't like specific components of, you know, the Lord of the Rings films. Um, 2 years to write, and then I think it was I don't, it's been a long time since I remember, but I think it was 8 years of total production um, to create all three films. And I think that started with the writing. So it might even say over here on the production. Dun, 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 costumes. Filming started in 1999. Okay. Post production. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I remember reading somewhere it was like 8 years. It's been a long time since I've read it, so who knows. In any case, um, fraction of a budget, twice the time to write the script, and in my mind, you actually get something that feels epic in scope and lived in. I love the fact that during the pitch process, they say that they pitched um, that their show would be Braveheart, not Narnia, because you want it real and lived in. And that's one of the things that a lot of people have complained about with the Rings of Power, is that it looks clean and fresh, like it's not lived in. Whereas you go to Peter Jackson's films and you can watch the documentation about the amount of love and care and detail that went into crafting all of the leather and the belts and the clothing and the cloaks and the swords and the armor, hand stitching everything, hand carving everything. And I know Weta did some work on Rings of Power, but the difference is, spending 7, 8 years, whatever it was, living in Middle Earth to do the Peter Jackson films versus hurry up, let's go, 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 go. We got to get a season out. Let's go quickly as possible. The Amazon production feels rushed by comparison, and I think most people would agree that it feels like it's all about the exploitation of the intellectual property, but not in a good way. There's nothing wrong when people say exploitation of intellectual property, they're just referring to the use of that intellectual property to create lots of cool things that we as consumers can enjoy. And I'm a big fan of that. There's a saying that I love: all Star Wars is good Star Wars. It's just that some Star Wars is better than other Star Wars. And you can apply that to Star Trek. You can apply that to Middle Earth. You can apply that to Marvel movies. You can apply that to any franchise you want to. I'm of the opinion that there's no such thing as something that you should write off as a completely bad adaptation or version of, or, an exploitation of an intellectual property. And yes, I will include Rings of Power in that. And I have said this before in some of my past videos. At the end of the day, the one thing Rings of Power will do, it will bring more fans to Middle Earth. And you can never, ever, if you are a true fan of Tolkien, if you are an actual fan of Tolkien, you will never, ever completely throw out something that's going to bring more fans to the books. Because as many people as watch Rings of Power and go, oh, there's a book series. I've never read the books. I should read the books. They'll go read the books. They'll see the things that we see, and they'll come around. So don't think that they won't. Give credit where credit is due. People are not that stupid. Some people might be, but the vast majority of people, when they go read a book, they're going to come away and go, wait a second, that was a lot different than what I saw on screen. So make sure you give credit where credit is due. But I think the overall consensus for me after reading this interview with Hollywood Reporter is that um, the guys behind Rings of Power, I don't even remember their names. That's how inconsequential Rings of Power has been to me in the scope of things. I've made more than 85 Rings of Power videos since February of 2022, and I still can't remember the showrunners' names. Whereas Peter Jackson's name has been like, and they'll be marked on my soul forever because I love those films despite the changes and yes, flaws. They have flaws. I talked about this in the other video I did the other day on the Peter Jackson problem that Amazon has. I talked about the flaws in Peter Jackson's films from my perspective. Everybody's got a different opinion on things. But this Rings of Power production feels very rushed. It definitely feels like these guys did what they said they did here in the article, in the interview. Um, they literally did a marathon session and cracked the code within a single session. They laid out 5 seasons of a show, and that was it. They were like, got it, got the code, we're good to go. Where we've created the epic spectacle that we need to pitch to Amazon, and this is going to convince them because we're going to be able to sell lots of tickets. And I feel like the difference here was that they were writing a pitch to convince, read this, presidential campaign is what they said. This doesn't mean that you have anything to do, it doesn't mean that you have any sort of actual passion for the actual books. When I look at Peter Jackson's process, it was very much about adapting what was there and taking the world of Tolkien and properly portraying that on film. And everything I've seen these two showrunners do is all about, again, writing the novel that Tolkien never wrote and adapting this little narration sequence from the beginning of Peter Jackson's films and saying, we're going to take this little, few minute clip and break that down into 5 seasons of television using a bunch of characters that didn't actually exist in the books about a period of time that we don't have the rights to, and somehow we're going to tell a coherent story with all of that. But we're going to do it in a way that convinces the Amazon executives that it's going to be a blockbuster tent pole. We're going to blow it up. We're going to create the Game of Thrones that you need. And it feels to me very much like they gave a polished pitch of a streamlined, fast-paced, explosion-ridden show, a Marvel spectacle that doesn't have any soul to it because they didn't actually spend any time. Instead, they spent a single marathon session dissecting material that they don't even have the rights to and saying, this is how we can make this work. Whereas Peter Jackson had the entirety of the books to delve into and use as his source material, so he didn't have to create anything from scratch. He was able to just simply rework what was already there. Love to hear your thoughts. Drop them down below. I know this has been a sort of a longer episode than what I normally do, but this has been driving me nuts. It's been bugging me ever since I read this interview. The casual kind of, yeah, man, single night, single marathon session. Yeah, man, that's how good we are. We are so good. We were able to crack that code in a single session, and that's how that's how good we are. Yeah, let's pitch that to the Amazon executives. Oh, and yeah, we're gonna speak Elvish to Simon Tolkien and whatever. Thoughts below. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, support in all the ways I talked about it earlier. And of course, don't forget, if you don't want to do a membership, it's super simple. You can just do super chats and super thanks on these videos. You can also go to our Patreon page where my wife and my brother have a fantastical world of our own, which is a book series. It's a tabletop game, and it is a point-and-click adventure game. So check that out. And I will hopefully see everybody in the next episode of the Rings of Power Rant series, or Mondays in Middle Earth, every Monday at 11 a.m. Central Time. Until next time, everybody, stay safe, happy reading, and happy viewing for those of you who are still out there watching shows like House of the Dragon, Star Wars Andor, Wheel of Time, and don't forget, we got Willow coming up and a whole bunch of other stuff. Peace!